Hello, good evening, and welcome to the final talk of Antarctica Now. I'm Ian Holdcroft. I'm co-founder of Shackleton. If you've just joined us from the talk from Steve Jones, then welcome back. Fantastic to have you back again. And if you're joining us for the very first time, then welcome. It's great to have you. All the talks we've had this week, you'll be able to see at your pleasure on shackletonlondon.com. So please feel free to head over there during this week and see all the fantastic talks that we've had. We've enjoyed an incredible lineup of speakers covering a broad range of topics from geopolitics, science, technology, photography, architecture, engineering, wildlife, and climate change. And if you've been with us throughout the week, then thank you so much for your support. The attendance has been incredible and the feedback from the audience around the world has been absolutely superb. This evening, we have turned our attention to exploration. And it has been my great pleasure to introduce two titans of Antarctic expeditions. We have just heard from ALE Steve Jones, and now we are joined by record-breaking polar explorer and Shackleton Director of Expeditions, Louis Rudd, MBE. Louis is a former Royal Marine Commando and is one of the longest serving members in the history of the SAS, 25 years, I believe. He is the first and the only person to have traversed Antarctica twice using human power alone, and has reached the South Pole on 3 separate occasions from 3 different coastal start points. He is a member of the Exclusive Explorers Club, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, a published author, and since retiring from the military, is Shackleton's Director of Expeditions. This evening, Louis will be talking to us about mission and purpose, and highlighting some of the key moments across his 3 Antarctic expeditions. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, so please feel free to post your questions on the questions board, and we'll endeavour to get us through as many as possible at the end of Louis' talk. So, the moment we've all been waiting for. Louis, take it away.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian. Well, welcome everyone, and yeah, it's a privilege to be able to speak at this incredible event, Antarctica Now, that Shackleton London have produced, and pressure's on a little bit to deliver off the back of some incredible speakers that I've been listening to throughout the week, but I shall give it my best shot. So the plan this evening is I would actually like to start with a question. And the reason I want to start with a question, it's a question that I've been asked many times. Do a fair bit of speaking, and I ran schools and universities, corporates, and it comes up quite a lot. And I've always struggled to properly answer this question because it's a pretty difficult question. And the question is usually along the lines of, if you could name one factor that you believe is key to success on expeditions, what would it be? And the reason, as you can imagine, that is difficult to answer is there's lots of things that are key to success of an expedition. You know, you could talk about the planning stage of it, looking at that, the fundraising. You know, without the money, you're not going anywhere. And a lot of the time, the fundraising is one of the most difficult aspects of going on an expedition itself. You've got all the training, both physical and mental preparation before you go on these journeys. If it's a team event, you know, selecting the team, and one particular team, it took me nearly 2 years to select, you know, the right guys to go on the expedition. So again, absolutely critical getting the right team members for the success of the expedition. And that's where we even get on to the kit and equipment as well, again, which can really, you know, be a deal breaker if you don't get that right, particularly in Antarctica if you're trying to do an unsupported journey with no form of resupply. So there's so many factors that how could you possibly name one thing, you know, that encompasses all of that. And I've done a lot of thinking over the years and, you know, answered this question in many different ways. And I think I've finally got to a point where probably there is something, and I've kind of think I have something now that's a better answer than what I've done in the past. And this talk will explain my thinking behind that. And what I believe is a better answer to that question of a single factor is a sense of purpose for the expedition. And for me, you know, you can call it, you know, it can be your mission, your objective, you know, the goal, but I'm going to phrase it as, you know, sense of purpose. And for me, that's the one aspect, you know, when you're on expedition that when, you're having a particularly tough time, something's gone wrong, had some gear failures, setbacks, and you start to question what it is that you're doing, or just, physically, mentally, you're exhausted. If you've got that clear sense of purpose as to why you're there and why you're doing this, that is the thing that will get you out of the tent, in the morning, day after day, to go out there, and do battle and ski to 10, 11 hours, whatever it is, that's the thing that will keep pushing you on. And for me, that is, probably the most critical factor. And I shall attempt to explain more. So my first realization, my earliest recollection of gaining a sense of purpose was when I was about 12 years old. I was at secondary school, been at grammar school for about a year, and got myself into a spot of bother. I had a altercation with the maths teacher, and I got sent to see the headmaster. And I was waiting in the headmaster's outer reception room, sat in there pretty terrified because I was convinced I was going to get caned, and never been caned before, only 12 years old, and I was pretty terrified and probably playing the old waiting game tactics on me. And I'd been sat in there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and there was a little bookshelf off to the side. And without really paying any attention, I just randomly grabbed a book off the shelf. And it happened to be this book that's on the screen now, Captain Scott, little ladybird book. And I just remember flicking through this book, and I'd never heard of Antarctica. It wasn't covered in school curriculum. Certainly hadn't heard of Captain Scott or polar explorers. And I flicked through this book and just started to really get engrossed with these incredible images, depictions of Scott and his men and their epic struggle to try and be the first guys to reach the South Pole. And it completely blew my mind, and it gave me a completely different perspective, reading about these guys on a life and death expedition, and suddenly me about to go in and get caned, it seemed a lot less daunting. I was no longer terrified. I was like, crikey, I'm only going to get smacked on the bum here. I'm not going to lose my life in that room, as these guys, lost their lives trekking to the South Pole and back. And that's when I kind of thought, right, this is what I want to do. I want to go down there and experience this place myself and be a polar explorer. So this photograph is Captain Scott and his men after they arrived at the South Pole. And you've got Scott stood up in the center at the back. It looks like he's got his eyes closed there, and his 4 teammates. And the striking thing for me when I look at this image, and I have this hanging downstairs in my house, and I look at it regularly, is the expression on their faces. And you'd expect after weeks and weeks of bitter struggle, and they've skied 900 miles by this point, and they've arrived at the South Pole, that they would be elated. They'd be, happy men, goal achieved. But as we all know, they arrived to find the tent left behind by the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, and realized they'd been beaten in this epic race to try and be the first people to reach the South Pole. And for me, in this picture, these guys are broken men. You can see the psychological blow from losing out on this race, and they lost their sense of purpose all the way to the pole. They were pushing hard, and they had this goal to get there. They arrived, realized they'd been beaten, and that's it. And they didn't seem to make that transition. They then had to turn around and try and ski 900 miles back to their ship and safety on the coastline. And they didn't really make that transition to going from, right, okay, we've done that piece, we've lost out on the race. Now the main purpose, for Scott as the leader, is to get my men back safely, to the ship. And as we all know, throughout varying parts of the journey, they all perished. This painting hangs in the Cavalry and Guards Club down in London, and it's titled "A Very Gallant Gentleman." And it depicts Captain Lawrence Oates leaving the tent during the return journey. He got really bad frostbite in his feet, and he felt that he was slowing Captain Scott and the remaining guys down and jeopardizing their chance of safely making it back to the ship. So essentially, in the act of selfless commitment for what he believed a higher purpose, a higher purpose than his own life, he walked out of that tent and essentially gave up his life in the hope that Scott and the remaining guys would safely make it back. Sadly, even this very gallant action wasn't sufficient, and Scott and the remaining guys froze to death inside their tent and their sleeping bags, and were discovered the following season by a search party. And this is the cairn that was built and erected over their tents. And indeed, they were only 11 miles from reaching a large resupply of food and equipment, 1-ton depot, where they could have sat, hopefully gorged themselves, recovered for a few days, and then successfully completed the journey back. Somebody that had a very strong sense of purpose, and has already been mentioned by Steve, obviously, is Shackleton and the Endurance Expedition, the first attempt to go down to the continent and go right the way across. As already mentioned, didn't work out. Ship got trapped in the ice, as we know. And I think Shackleton, he made that switch from realizing that the expedition was no longer viable. They'd lost the ship and the purpose had changed, and his purpose to him became clear from that point on. His mission was to get his 27 men safely back, not to lose a single guy. And then from hauling, the boats across the ice, getting to Elephant Island, then completing the crossing of the Drake Passage, landing on South Georgia, the nearest habitation, but the wrong side of South Georgia to the Norwegian whaling station, and then completing the epic crossing of the glacier, getting all the way back, organizing a rescue from Chile, and then repeated attempts, and finally getting back to Elephant Island and rescuing all the guys, and that clear change of purpose for me, was hugely impressive. And obviously for anyone that's read Endurance, an absolutely fascinating story. And I guess it's quite fitting that after we talk about Shackleton, that we talk about this guy. So on the right-hand side, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Worsley. I learned a huge amount from this guy, and he gave me my first opportunity to go down to Antarctica and experience a polar journey. It's something, I'd always wanted to do from a very young age, but fairly busy with my sort of military life, and I didn't really get the opportunity. And I met Henry in 2009, and he came up with a plan to go down to Antarctica in 2011 and recreate what happened 100 years before. So on the centenary of those journeys by Roald Amundsen and Captain Scott, to go and recreate what happened 100 years before with two teams, starting from the original start points. So myself and Henry were to start from the Bay of Wales on the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf, and would race against three friends from the military who would start from Captain Scott's hut, and would race with no communications whatsoever between the two teams. We literally got dropped off in November 2011 over a satellite phone link. It was literally on your marks, get set, go. And then we hung up, and then no communications, and we raced about between 800 and 900 miles over 2.5 months to see who would get to the South Pole first. So a huge expedition with real clear purpose to it, to commemorate these original journeys, which again highly motivated both teams. So it was just the two of us on our route, myself and Henry, and we'd been skiing for about 6 weeks, and we covered nearly 400 miles across the Ross Ice Shelf. And Henry was skiing like a demon. He was hauling like a cart horse all the way across the ice shelf, to the point where I was struggling to keep up with him. Every day was a battle for me. With this guy just charging away out front. And it was a relief when I would do my stints in front, where I could slightly control the pace and slow things down to more in my comfort zone. But his stints up front, he was really sort of powering ahead. And what I didn't realize was he had a hidden purpose. We got to the base of the Transantarctic Mountains, and we were going to be going up the Axel Heiberg Glacier. And when we got there, Henry had a copy of the original diaries of Amundsen, and every night in the tent he would kind of read out sections from the diary and relate to what the Norwegians had been going through 100 years before, and and what we were experiencing on our journey. And and I kind of didn't really get it at the time, and my fascination with polar history definitely wasn't as strong as Henry's. And as part of his research, he'd worked out that Amundsen and his team, they built a small stone cairn at the base of the Axel Heiberg on their return journey. And essentially it was also a marker beacon for a main depot of food and equipment they buried in the ice. And they'd accessed all the stores and equipment down on the ice sheet, but there was no mention they'd remove this stone cairn. So when we arrived here, we'd skied for about 11 hours. We got into the tent, pretty exhausted as usual. And he then revealed this hidden purpose, that while we were in this approximate area, he would like to go out and try and find this cairn. And he didn't really have any detailed coordinates, of exactly where it's going to be. There was going to be a bit of searching involved. I wasn't really up for it. Like I mentioned, I was pretty exhausted. I had some kit repairs to do, and we agreed a plan whereby he would pop out on his own and go and try and search for this thing. So off he went, and he skis off and he takes this series of pictures. And he had to ski for a couple of hours to get into the area of this rocky outcrop called Mount Betty, that Amundsen named after one of his nursemaids as a kid. And you can see now, kind of along the ridge line, a slightly unnatural sort of pyramid shape which he spotted. And he skis over, takes his skis off, scrambles up the rock, gets onto the ridge line, gets a bit closer, and now there's this obvious man-made cairn, and he heads over to it, does a quick selfie, as you do, and then he pulls a rock from out the side of this cairn, and then sat inside is this rusted tin of cooker fuel with a little tin of matches sat on top that's been sat there, for 100 years, and it's the only thing left behind in Antarctica, from the first team to reach the South Pole. How he discovered this thing, and it's absolutely, incredible. By the time he got back to the tent, he was way over the agreed time I was going to allow him. I was in a mild panic, packing all the kit away and literally just clipping on my skis, expecting the worst, about to head out on his ski tracks, thinking, oh my God, he's probably going to crevasse or something. And I saw this black shape in the distance coming out. It was the weather had closed in by this point, with his arms waving and shouting, and I couldn't really hear anything because of the wind. And the first thing I heard, once he got within earshot, was, I found it, and and got into the tent. And for him, that was, the purpose, of that expedition was the finding this cairn and this incredible sort of polar monument, if you like, from the first team to reach the pole. And there's a short clip here, a video that I've never actually shown anyone in public before, of him talking about it. So please enjoy.
Well, here we are, 12 miles short of the South Pole. A little time to reflect on some of the highlights of the journey, and I'm only going to pick out one actually for me, not the Axel Heiberg, because that can be sort of discussed at a sort of separate time. But it was a hugely major part of the journey. But for me, actually, the really significant moment to reflect on was going up Mount Betty and finding the cairn that two members of Amundsen team that had built on their return journey, and left behind two simple items: a petrol can with paraffin in it, and a little tin with some matches and a note. And to actually see that on top of Mount Betty, and the cairn still there, I suspect it's been rebuilt since, but there's that little can and the little tin that sits on top of it. And that is the only tangible piece of sort of evidence of Amundsen's journey, the only thing that is left. Captain Scott, you've got his hut, of course, but Framheim disappeared into the ocean shortly after they left. So it's the only part on the journey that marks any significant moment that one can actually sort of put a touch on. And to see it just tucked away there in that cairn, be left by two members of his team on the return journey to help others should they come across it. And there it still is, with the fuel still in that tin, was a great moment for me. And as I say, to have that fingertip feel for very much being part of the Amundsen route really was a very special moment.
So hopefully that, gives you a feel for, just for him, what a huge motivation, on that journey, to find that cairn, and really was, the crowning glory and the moment for him during that whole expedition. We then had to carry on climbing the Axel Heiberg, some pretty huge crevassing, as you can see here. That's a picture of me to give you a sense of scale, and you could throw buildings into some of these things and they would disappear. And it really was a maze. We were working our way, a lot of the time we weren't skiing directly towards the South Pole. We were sort of boxing left and right around these things. And in the center of the screen, you can just make our ski tracks as we're sort of kind of coming through this area of heavy crevassing. And we're now up on the high ground and kind of just looking back down on the route we've come through. Few of the setbacks, we were by no means out of the woods once we'd got ourselves onto the polar plateau. I've no idea why Henry's smiling in this photograph, because he was in a horrendous amount of pain. He managed to snap a tooth off on a piece of frozen Mars bar. I then had to switch purposes from being an expeditioner to being a dentist. And we had a rudimentary field dentistry kit in a medical pack. And he was in a lot of pain because he'd exposed a lot of the nerve endings in his gum. And so every time he was breathing in super cold air, You can imagine how painful that was. So we had to use some sort of temporary filling kit to seal his gum and try and make him a bit more comfortable. But despite all the setbacks, after 67 days together, we made it into the geographic South Pole and completed the purpose of that expedition. And the first question we asked when we arrived was, had the Scott team arrived? And they hadn't, and they came in 9 days after us. So we almost recreated history in that respect. And I guess, I had a strong sense of purpose. We were recreating history, and that allowed me to sort of push myself pretty hard. Before I started the journey, I weighed about sort of 13 stone, so nearly, a couple hundred kilograms, probably just a bit less. 67 days later, when I arrived at the South Pole, I looked like this. And so, having that clear purpose in my head, and that drive and motivation for this journey allowed me to push myself, physically, to a limit. And, we really found, we're both in a similar state, and we obviously badly got the nutrition wrong on this journey and learned a huge amount, but it just made the journey unnecessarily difficult. The last couple of weeks, really feeling the cold and physically, struggling to move the sledges. As already mentioned in the previous presentation, as a lot of you be aware of, very sadly, in 2016, Henry lost his life attempting a solo crossing of the continent. And at that point, I was already planning a second expedition to go back, really learn all the skills that I'd picked up in polar travel from Henry, and definitely I learned a huge amount about leadership from him as well. And I planned to go back and lead a team of 5 army reservists on a 1,100-mile crossing of the continent. And our aim very much changed with the sad demise of Henry the year before. And the whole sort of purpose then of this expedition became to complete this journey that Henry had attempted, and to get to his final campsite, conduct a memorial service, and then finish off that sort of final 100-odd miles that Henry hadn't been able to do himself down the Shackleton Glacier. And that kind of purpose really bonded the team. It took me 2 years to select these guys over the course of several weekends and training trips to Norway, Iceland, etc. Had initial applications for over 100 people, and over the course of the months, whittled them down with some horrendous selection processes, dragging tires around 3-kilometer loops for 6 or 7 hours at a time to give them a taste of what was going to come to in Antarctica. But what we found was that unifying, we all had this burning desire to get to at least make it, to Henry's final campsite. And do this memorial service. And that was the thing that really sort of bonded the team and unified our purpose. So Strugi and apple sounds like a dessert, doesn't it? One of the coping strategies that we, a lot of polar travelers use for these long sort of days and tackling sastrugi. So you can see sastrugi in the picture here. I should explain what it is. It's these rock hard ridges of ice that are carved by the wind, and they can vary from a few inches high to sometimes a few feet, and they're the bane of polar travelers' lives. They can really hamper your progress and get quite frustrating. And one of the great ways to combat endless days of bumping and bouncing over sastrugi is to listen to music and audiobooks. And one of the team members on this trip, there was the 6 of us, Alex, had a vast collection of music, which he spent quite a bit of time with the bragging rights. He had about 5,000 songs that he downloaded from Apple Music, and I only had probably 40 or 50 and a few audiobooks. And what he didn't realize was with Apple Music, if you don't connect your device after 30 days to reconfirm your subscription, it freezes everything on your phone. So 30 days into a 67-day crossing of the continent, he loses all of his music. And all he's got left on his phone is an audio recording that his best mate had given to him before he left the UK. And he'd said to him, Alex, done this motivational audio recording for you. And, in your darkest hour, when you really feel like you need to pick me up, then have a listen to this. So Alex is right. Okay, new purpose in life, and I'm going to have to ski, do at least 20 odd days, and then, when I feel I really need it, I'll listen to this recording. So he did, had nothing to listen to for quite a while. And about day 50 of the expedition, had a bit of a tough day. Weather was pretty rubbish, and he decided, right, this is the moment. And he hit play on this recording, and it ended up being his best mate and his girlfriend reading a chapter from 50 Shades of Grey, which is probably the last thing you needed to hear at that point there. But we all had a good laugh at that at his expense. We made it into the South Pole. So we'd done 720 miles by that point, picked up a resupply of food, had a couple of days there before we then set out on the next leg of the journey. Sadly, at that point, one of the team members, Alan, he'd had a really difficult journey just to get to the pole. And again, he was starting to lose a significant amount of body mass and some other issues. And again, really harking back to, the ultimate sacrifice that Oates made that we talked about. Alan made the very brave decision to remove himself from the expedition at that point, because he thought he might jeopardize our chances of reaching Henry's final campsite and completing the journey. So he removed himself from the trip at that point, and we continued on with 5 people. We had to cross the Titan Dome on the far side of the continent. Pretty challenging. You're gaining altitude from the pole, and it's just notorious for really low temperatures, being particularly windswept. There's a short video, I think, that gives you a taste of a typical day high up on the Titan Dome. Not great visibility, as you can see at that point. We probably just finished the day here and pitched the tents. And it's one of the team members, Chris, trying to talk, but his voice is completely lost in the wind. And we carried it, and we got finally, after it took us about nearly 2 weeks to cross the Titan Dome and reach the top of the Transantarctic Mountains and the mouth of the Shackleton Glacier. And this is where pretty much Henry had ground to a halt in 2016. So it was, for the team, it was a hugely poignant moment to be able to get there. We conducted a memorial service, and then from that point on, it was about doing that 100 miles down the Shackleton Glacier on behalf of Henry. Very different type of terrain to what we were used to. It was off with the skis. We were onto crampons, and there was a lot of crevassing in there, but much smaller fissures as this glacier flowed down from the polar plateau and out towards the sea. And we had right at the mouth of the glacier opened up, and we came across this area of quite flat ice, and we were making great progress across it. And we got to an area, a small channel of weakened ice, and we had to get across it to get to where our pickup point was going to be on the far side. And we decided we could have roped up, but we decided actually it was a short gap, and the safest way would be to use the sledge, your polk as a toboggan, leap on it and sail across. And so I went first, zipped across this sort of 10-meter gap, and it was perfectly fine. And the last person to go was Chris, and he was a little bit heavier than the rest of us. And luckily we were videoing this, and this is what happened when Chris decided to toboggan across.
It's how you cross a frozen river in Antarctica without breaking the ice. The ice bear will demonstrate.
As you can hear stacks of sympathy from the team members. That's Alex hyperventilating in the background. He's just on the very edge of it, still a little bit worried, so I just tow him off the last bit.
Yeah, textbook demonstration like that. Very on the polk.
Yeah, sorry to do it.
And walk over that and fucking gone through.
So a bit of fun right at the end of the journey, but it could have been a little bit dangerous. And then finally, after 1,100 miles and 67 days, these guys did an incredible job and completed the journey, and we stepped onto the Ross Ice Shelf. And bearing in mind, most of these team members, never done a major expedition before. Some of them had never put a set of skis on their feet prior to starting the process, to build up and prepare for this. So they did an incredible job. And for me, I was done. That was everything I had to complete that trip. However, these guys had different ideas. We got picked up and flown back to the Union Glacier ALE camp that Steve mentioned earlier, the logistics hub, which is still in Antarctica itself. And we got off the plane, and this random guy came walking over to the aircraft and said, "Hey guys, amazing job. I know you've just skied across the continent. However, I'm the organizer of the Antarctic Ice Marathon, and pure luck, it's happening tomorrow." And he was kind of like tongue in cheek. And I just laughed in his face, and I was like, "Oh, no, thanks very much." These other lads sat on the plane behind me were like, oh yeah, that sounds quite cool. You know, unique opportunity, go and run a marathon in Antarctica. We wouldn't get a chance to do that again. So the day after we finished this, they went out, begged, borrowed and stole running kit from the other 40 odd competitors that were doing this race. And bearing in mind, they've not had a shower for like, you know, 70 odd days now. They went out and ran a marathon the day after we finished in Antarctica. And over on the left-hand side, the guy in black bent over double, one of our team members, Alex, out of an international field. I think it was about 44 runners. He came 4th in this race. You know, absolutely incredible. So they ended up inspiring me with that. I pretty much just stood on the sidelines and watched that. And then very quickly, just to finish off, you know, talking about, you know, this whole sense of purpose. I felt with all this experience that I'd built up, you know, on the previous journeys, that I was in a position to go down and attempt a solo, unsupported crossing of the Antarctic landmass. So on my own, no form of food resupply, not using kites, and try and do a complete crossing of the landmass itself. And this is how I went out, you know, about it. One of the most important things and one of the most difficult aspects of going solo is the sheer weight that you need to haul behind you, because I was looking to carry, you know, 75 days of food and equipment. And initially, when I did a test load, it was nearly 160 kilograms, which from experience, I just knew, you know, I would struggle to make meaningful progress with that kind of amount of weight. So it was a case of going through every single piece of kit and just working out, you know, what do I really need? What's the bare minimum I can get away with here? You know, and it was every bit of kit, you know, served the purpose. Some of it, you know, several purposes. You know, my skis I was using for skiing during the day, but then they were also tent pegs for securing the guy lines, you know, at night. I didn't have any spare clothing, you know, whatsoever, and there was zero luxuries in there. And then finally, after 2 years really of sort of build up and preparation and planning and everything I needed to do, we got flown out to the start point on the edge of the continent in one of Ailey's twin otters that you can see here. And even with all that experience, you know, I was daunted and you know, uncertain about, you know, my chances of success on this journey. And one of the things that I did to, I guess, to psychologically make it, you know, less daunting of trying to ski, you know, just under 1,000 miles across the landmass, was to break the whole journey down into these manageable, psychological bite-sized chunks. And the way I did it, my food was packaged in these 10-day sacks. And in the bottom of every 10-day bag was this chocolate pudding. It was like 1,000-calorie chocolate dessert. And all I thought about when I got dropped off, and this photograph was taken from day one, and you can just sort of make out my ski tracks. I'm looking back the way I've come. And all I thought about, I didn't think about, you know, the Ross Ice Shelf or the South Pole, or, you know, sort of how many days potentially it was going to take me. All I thought about was get to day 10 and you get this chocolate pudding. That's all you've got to worry about, you know, and mentally that just made it, you know, more manageable for me. And I did that. I just did this 10-day journey. I got to day 10, got to the bottom of this food bag, you know, sat in my tent like a giggling schoolboy with this chocolate pudding, you know, feasting on that. And then I was like, right, you know, all you need to worry about now is get to the next chocolate pudding, you know, get to day 20. And I just did that, and I broke the whole journey down into these 10-day blocks until eventually I arrived on the far side. The dreaded, it was a really bad season for sastrugi. When we were down there was lots of other soloists doing journeys from intercoastal starts to pole that abandoned their trips because of the conditions that season. And you can see the sort of, you know, heights of bits of it here. It was pretty intense. And I took this shot. Some bits you get these wind scoops, so you'll get, you know, a sort of carving of sastrugi, and then you get a wind scoop underneath, and it can actually result in places in quite a significant drop, you know, several feet. And in good visibility conditions, you know, not a problem. You can weave your way around this stuff. But there was this particular day, I came out of the tent in the morning, and this is a photograph I've taken. I'm about to set off, and it's white out, and it's where cloud comes in, completely obscures the sun, and you just lose all definition between the ground and the sky, and you just can't see the terrain that you're skiing over, and you're kind of feeling your way forward, and you look down, and all you can see is your compass that's mounted on your chest frame, you know, to make sure that you're skiing a straight line towards the pole, and the tips of your skis, and that's it. And this was a point where I really had to draw on, you know, the purpose, you know, why I was doing this, because I was about 5 hours into the day, and I'd obviously skied up onto a lump of this sastrugi that I just couldn't see, with a bit of a wind scoop on the other side that resulted in about it was several feet drop, and I skied straight off the end of it you know, and just face planted, fell. I mean, for a split second, I thought I was going down a crevasse. I was absolutely terrified. Crash landed, just face planted into the snow, snapped the tip of my ski off. My ski just split open. And then the polk came over, still weighing about sort of 80 kilograms, and landed across my back. And I just had this ridiculous comedy 2 minutes of stuck face down in the snow. I'd like bust my lip, you know, I was a bit winded, you know, struggling to get out from underneath my polk. And I kind of sat there for a few minutes after I was semi-recovered and I was a bit winded, and just, you know, it was a moment where I thought, this is too dangerous. This isn't possible. You know, I can't travel in these conditions. And I was very close to pulling the pin on and aborting the expedition. And it was at that point where I went back, you know, to the why I was there, you know, and the purpose, you know, of what I was doing and why I was doing it, you know, and all those reasons. And that was the thing that kind of turned it around for me. And that's why I think, you know, this overarching sort of higher purpose, that, you know, when you are, you know, you are suffering and you're having, you know, a really difficult time, you know, having that is the thing that will kind of keep you going. If you haven't got that sort of nailed from the beginning and fully believe in it, you know, and are committed to it, you know, that's where you can lose the motivation. Got to the pole, but not the goal, as mentioned there. Had to carry on. Didn't hang around. I stayed for about half an hour at the pole. Some of the Americans from the base that you can see in the background, the Scott Armisen Research Station, came out very kindly, took these pictures for me. But then I headed off then to try and get across to the Ross Ice Shelf. Some spectacular scenery as I was going across the top of the polar plateau on the far side. These incredible halos, you know, around the sun, called parhelions or sun dogs, caused by frozen ice crystals in the atmosphere. A few setbacks, you know, silly mistakes. Face mask just moved one day on a strong headwind, and I got a bit of frost nip down the side of my face. I got a polar thigh injury. So this is the inside of my right knee. And it started as an abrasion injury where my knees have been rubbing together skiing and weakened the skin. And then the cold got in and attacked it and created this big open wound, which I then had to manage, you know, and prevent getting any worse. But finally, I spotted the Transantarctic Mountains in the distance, which kind of signified getting onto the home run, and they were going to provide my gateway down off the polar plateau and onto the Ross Ice Shelf. And it was great to finally have a bit of a downhill run in the final phases. And I was following a route, the spot. It's the South Pole Overland Traverse route. And the Americans use this route to resupply the South Pole Station from McMurdo. And about 2 or 3 times a year, they'll drive these big track sort of convoys up. And the plus side of following this route was that, you know, it was you're pretty much safe from crevassing. So as a soloist, it was a good choice to avoid the risks of going down a crevasse. Because if you go into crevasse, obviously solo, then you're in big trouble. And then finally, after 56 days, pretty much completely on my own by the brief encounter with the US researchers at the station, made it down off the continent and onto the Ross Ice Shelf to complete a solo, unsupported crossing of the Antarctic landmass. A little bit lean. I took this, in fact, Colin O'Brady, coming a couple of days ahead of me, he took this picture. So I'd lost about 15 kilograms, but in pretty good shape. You know, if I'd had to have carried on, I reckon with a resupply, I certainly could have done, and nowhere near as skinny as that first trip with Henry. So learned a huge amount about nutrition from that. A bit of repurposing. When we got in, myself and Colin, we were pretty much out of our food, and we were hoping to get picked up, you know, pretty quickly. But due to the weather conditions and the fact that ALE are obviously the far side of the continent, it was quite a long flight to get to us. They sort of quoted it was going to be about 3 days before they could get out. And luckily we spoke to the pilots, and they informed us they'd been out the season before and dropped off these barrels of aviation fuel so they could resupply the small ski plane that was coming to get us. And underneath one of the barrels, they dug in a cool box full of food, and it had actually been put in for a previous expeditioner that had been attempting the same journey, but sadly never made it this far, and it had been buried in the ice for a year. So like a pair of giggling schoolboys, we dug this thing up, and inside it was packed with like French cheeses and ham and coffee and chocolate and just things we hadn't had for 2.5 months. So again, we're a proper pair of giggling schoolboys feasting on this stuff, and it was enough to last us until the ski plane came in 3 days later. And then finally, after the wait, the ALE got the Twin Otter over, and the pilots very kindly bought us a bottle of champagne, which went straight to our heads as we supped that out of a couple of paper cups on the journey home. So just to finish it off, I could say for me, having that strong sense of purpose, understanding the why, you're doing these trips, I think for me is critical, because everything else, falls out from that. That's your motivation, for all your training and your preparation. And also when you're on the trip, on those sort of difficult days, reverting back to that understanding of, why you're doing this. And if it's something you truly believe in and you're really passionate about, then, I think that is critical to, to mission success when you're doing these long range, difficult expeditions. And future purpose for me, as already mentioned, I'm very fortunate now I'm working with Shackleton. One of my, one thing I'm passionate about is kit and equipment on these journeys. And I've never had a really good sort of, bit of polar clothing to do these journeys. And a project I'm now working on with Shackleton is we're going to, produce something, proper expedition grade clothing, that is suitable for these kind of long range polar journeys, because it's really difficult for expeditioners, to find, sort of, dedicated products, niche stuff that's suitable for, for doing the Arctic and the Antarctic. So we're looking to take that on, which would be great. Shackleton quests are going to be fantastic fun. Unfortunately, we had to delay the ones from this year, but we're looking to be able to give people, a taste of, all the things I've been talking about in here, from, week-long taster experiences in Norway, right the way up to taking clients, out to Antarctica and experiencing a full range polar journey. So going to be really exciting times, for me to be able to share all this experience that I've built up over the years. And certainly I'll be doing my own expeditions as well back to Antarctica over the coming years. Brilliant. That concludes my presentation. I think, Ian, we're going to got a bit of time for some Q&A.
Indeed, we have, Lou. Fantastic. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it was really great to get a sense of just the the level of purpose and sort of mission. I mean, we talked a little bit about this on the phone the other day, actually, Lou. Just talk us through. I mean, because clearly, when you're going through such an enormous challenge, to have such a strong sense of purpose is critical to keep going, because you're going to have some really, really tough moments. But when you've achieved the goal, and that sense of purpose is now gone. I mean, how do you feel, almost like the next day, do you have is there a sense of loss, that you go through? I mean, just talk us through how that feels afterwards.
Yeah, it's right. Actually, that's very important. It's almost a recognized thing called post-expedition blues. Right. Because you're right. You've had, sometimes a couple of years you might have been working, on this expedition, all the fundraising, build-up training, and pretty much every day will be consumed. You'll be doing something in relation, to that expedition for a long period of time, and then you do the expedition. And you're right. And then once it's kind of done, and you come back, and then fairly soon afterwards, you have this almost like a sense of loss. It's almost like losing a limb. You think, my God, there's this big gap in my life now. I've no longer got this, this target, this goal, this dream, this sense of purpose, to motivate you to, to train and strive towards. So it takes a period of adjustment and coming back to, normal life and work and, the normal routines. It is difficult, and I know lots of expeditions have gone through the same thing, and the only solution is to fairly quickly start spinning something else up, which I kind of always done, and I'm always doing, and I do, and I find it motivates me. I find if I haven't got some kind of goal or objective that I'm striving towards, then I kind of do feel a bit listless, and don't keep on top of the sort of the training and stuff. But the minute I've got something and I've decided, right, this is what I want to do, then it's firing on all cylinders again. So yeah, it's something that's really important, and it's probably a useful strategy for everyone dealing with lockdown, in this period of enforced, not being able to do anything, just setting yourself these short-term goals, and objectives just to help while away the time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think so. It's important, isn't it, in any walk of life? Absolutely. Lou, I just want to take you back to 2018, build up to Spirit of Endurance expedition, and Steve Jones, who we just heard from earlier, expedition manager of ALE. He'd sort of been saying to us all along that there was, potential for 2 or 3 others to attempt the same journey that you had publicly stated you were going to be doing. And but nobody had sort of thrown their hat into the ring publicly. So, and he wouldn't divulge who it may or may not be. So, but I remember it was the morning after we had the party in London, a week before you were due to leave the UK to head to South America to start the journey to Antarctica. And the American endurance athlete, Colin O'Brady, went public. He suddenly announced that he was going to do it at the same time. Just talk me through a little bit, what was your initial reaction? How did you feel? Because obviously you've been training hard, you've been preparing. Obviously this whole sense of mission and purpose was really critical. And I guess in your own mind, you probably thought, I've got a shot at this. I'm probably going to be the only person on the ice this year doing it. But all of a sudden, that suddenly changed. Just what impact did that have on you?
Yeah, so I think initial reaction, I was surprised, definitely, because when for the sort of year or so that I'd been sort of planning this, and I went public quite early, which maybe was a mistake. I don't know, but you kind of need to do that for fundraising and sponsors and support anyway. And there was nobody else kind of on the radar. And actually, privately, I didn't think there was anybody else daft enough to want to go down and attempt this anyway. So, finding out, I guess, at the 11th hour, a week before I'm about to leave the UK, that there was somebody else it was surprise initially. Then I kind of had a phase of being a bit annoyed because it was like, right, well, this is a distraction that I could kind of do without. And then, but fairly quickly, the more I thought about it, there was a couple of ways to approach it. Was do I enter this as a race now, potentially? And I ruled that out fairly early on for several reasons. And I decided, I thought, well, number one, the journey's difficult enough as it is without actually, racing this thing. I need to prioritize, my number one priority needs to be successfully completing the trip. And privately, I thought actually the chances of two of us, both successfully completing, it was going to be pretty slim. So did I need to worry about, anybody else? Because I might not make it, he might not make it, etc. And I went back, to the purpose, actually, the original purpose of why I was doing the journey. And actually, and it wasn't, it was called the Spirit of Endurance. And it wasn't about necessarily being the first person to go and do this. It was, a lot of it was honoring the legacy. It was trying to do this journey that, great friend, mentor, huge role model for me, Henry Worsley, had lost his life attempting, I wanted to go back down and just see if I was capable of, cracking this journey that he'd tried. So I kind of went back to that. I thought, well, that's the purpose, and it's to do it safely. Obviously, my family had a lot of concerns about the safety side of it, having seen what had happened previously. So again, I assured them I wouldn't take any unnecessary risk. I wouldn't push myself too hard. And then in the end, actually, there was something that happened at the last minute, which gave me a much clearer purpose as well, and actually became the main purpose of the journey. And it was at that event that you just talked about, the send-off party in London a week before we left, and Henry's wife, Joanna, attended. And she gave me it was Henry's family crest flag, a small flat pennant flag that he'd carried with him, I think, on all of his expeditions, and he obviously had it on that solo journey. And she handed that to me and pretty much said, this time, see if you can get the flag all the way across. Right. And then that became actually the main purpose. And there was a lot of days, where I'd finish a hard day, get into the tent and just kind of pull that flag out, have a look at it, and just remind myself and think, right, actually, this is why you're here. It's to, hopefully get this flag all the way across. And I just spent the whole time visualizing this moment when I would be able to come back to the UK and return this flag and kind of say, job done. So with that in my mind, that became the main effort rather than worrying about, kind of racing and then, and that worked pretty well. And, went out and, got the right way across.
Very good. Kept you focused. I mean, as a consequence of obviously, Colin's ambitions and the sort of the PR that he sort of put into it, there was a heck of a lot of media attention, especially in the US, where they were billing it as a sort of modern day race to the pole. Clearly, you were totally oblivious to much of that was going on because, you were on the ice and, you had no comms, and sort of no contact with the outside world. And so, I mean, how did you feel at the end of the expedition when it suddenly became apparent that you were front page news of, all the broadsheets, international, news networks, and it captured almost the world's imagination. I think at one point, the Washington Post, underneath their main kind of daily news headline banner, there was a live tracker of you and Colin on the ice, and I mean, it was incredible. I mean, what impact did that have on you? You know, in the days immediately after the expedition, and even to this very day. I mean, what impacts are having on you?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it was a huge surprise because I had very limited. I'd scheduled calls with my expedition manager, Wendy Searle, back in the UK, but again, she was keeping a lot of that. We were just doing expedition business, and she didn't want to clutter my mind with anything that I didn't need to hear. So yes, I had no understanding of the scale of interest, and I guess that came about because there was the two of us, and there was all this talk of going back to Scott and Arms and almost kind of repeating history and racing to pole and stuff. And so I guess in the end there was advantages that there was two of us there, because it definitely spiked a huge amount of media interest. But yeah, once I got back to civilization, to Punta Arenas, and started to watch the TV and get back onto the internet, I started to understand the scale of it. And it was slightly surreal that I was expecting to fly straight back to the UK and see the family. And I ended up then, because of the sort of media requirements, flying from there straight to New York. So I went from being on my own for 2.5 months, pretty much completely isolated, to the center of New York, literally 2 or 3 days later, in one of the busiest cities in the world, being whisked from studio to studio. And it was it took a bit of getting used to, and I had to, like, now and again just have a few moments to myself and just go off to the bathroom and just sit down and just, like, clear my head and go, what's actually happening here. So it was a bit surreal and caught me out. And I've never been that comfortable with, like, interviewing and that kind of stuff anyway, but I had to get good at it pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very good. And I recall you were very thirsty that first evening in New York. I mean, I've got loads of other questions, and I'd love to just carry on talking with you, but I can see the questions are flying in, so I'm going to open it up to the floor. But before I do that, actually, and I think it sort of dawned on me whilst you were just talking there about mission and purpose, that on Shackleton's gravestone, I mean, obviously you'll be very familiar with the Robert Browning quote that's on one side, and maybe the listeners are or not, but I guess it sort of sums up what you're saying here, really, which is, I hold that a man should strive to the uttermost for his life set prize. In this day and age, I should hold that a person should. But, I guess that just sums it up quite nicely, that sense of mission and purpose, and just how important it is, whatever you're doing, whatever the challenge, whether it's polar exploration or, everyday life, you've got to have that strong sense of purpose just to keep you going through the difficult times. So something's got real meaning. Okay, so questions, there's loads of them, Lou, so I'm just going to pick them randomly. So I'm not going
to... Nothing's off limit, guys. So whenever I go into schools, it's like, how did you go to the toilet? So yeah.
Okay, so what would you recommend as a first cold expedition, and how?
Norway is a great place, to go. You can get, there's areas in Norway, Finse, where we're looking to conduct the Shackleton quests up on the Hardangervidda plateau. You can, that's where, Shackleton, Scott, Amundsen, all went to Finse in Norway to train and prepare for Antarctica. So that's, it's affordable compared to, going to the Arctic, or, obviously Antarctica is hugely expensive, and even go to Greenland, which is the only other ice sheet on the planet, Antarctica's little sister, as they call it, is a brilliant training place, but again, pretty expensive. So as a first step, definitely, in a sort of, polar environment, Norway is a great option. Also Sweden has some incredible routes. The King's Trail that's laid on there, again, is great for a taster. And there's lots of training, and like the packages that we're laying on through Shackleton, the Shackleton quests that we're looking to do next year, those are great introductions as 1 week kind of, like, taster packages where you'll learn, all the basic skills, and then go out on a mini sort of polar expedition at the end of it. So there's lots of great options out there, but yeah, kind of Europe to start with, just for the cost and ease of getting there, and then kind of build it up and just build your experience. And the sort of the holy grail of polar travel is, crossing of Greenland and then skiing to the North Pole and South Pole, sort of polar hat trick.
Brilliant. Okay, so question from Finn. What qualities do you look for in your fellow team members, and is it different than personal attributes for a solo expedition? So I remember Shackleton put a lot of emphasis when selecting his team on sense of humor and, just the importance of, banter and keeping morale high. I mean, what did you look for? And actually, whilst just expand a little bit when you're talking about this, because solo versus team are two entirely different challenges. Neither one's probably any easier or harder than the other. So if you could just talk a little bit around that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so with the team, so yeah, I got a huge amount of experience doing this with the Spear expedition. So so that was the middle one I talked about, where I was going to be selecting 5 guys from across the British Army. So I advertised the expedition across, all the Army reserves. Had well over 100 applicants at the start of the 2-year process. And then I kind of initially whittled it down through like questionnaires and interviews. And then we started doing these series of selection weekends because they were Army reservists, so their sort of training was on weekends. And would get together, I think for the first camp I took 50 applicants, and we would add them out tire hauling and doing a whole range of other things that were kind of relevant to the expedition, lessons and interviews, and getting them to do lessons and all that kind of stuff. And what became apparent in the team members over the course of this kind of selection process, the kind of people that started to rise to the top were the people that could cope, with duress. So the kind of guys that were, and it was open to females as well, and there was some ladies on the application as well. But it was the kind of people that when they were, sort of knackered, pretty exhausted, tired, hungry, soaked wet through, pretty cold and all the rest of it, could, were still pretty laid back and, still have a smile on their face, and crack a joke. And, they wouldn't be the ones that were like, starting to fling their kit around and having a hissy fit and getting all kind of stressed about stuff, which was like, would be disruptive, in a small team. It was these super laid back, but also very capable kind of characters, that could just be in the most like ridiculous circumstances and still crack a joke and, and have a smile. And they naturally sort of started to come through, and we ended up with a sort of team, that bonded well, and there was nobody in there that you could tell, when the going got tough, was going to get particularly stressed out. They would just soak it up, work out, a solution, and all the rest of it, and carry on. And it worked brilliantly. And, between the 6 of us, sharing, the 3 tents, for 67 days across the continent, we didn't have a single falling out or kind of bad word, between the teams. So, that worked really well. So yeah, I think it's that laid back, kind of characters, that work really well in small teams. And then for the solo side of it, I learned a huge amount about myself, on that journey. It's going solo, it's completely different in that in a team you'll change over the lead every hour or so, because being up front it's much more difficult. You're breaking through sort of fresh snow, so physically it's more difficult, with hauling the polk, and mentally it's much more difficult in that you're having to concentrate on navigating, so you're responsible for making sure you're skiing a straight line, so you're sort of focusing on the compass, you're looking out for crevassing, any hazards, so you're kind of like on edge, and it is a lot physically and mentally a lot more tiring being up front. And then you kind of do your stint and then you drop onto the rear, onto the train, and then you're like number 6, you're in a cut track, you're just following the polk in front of you, you got your music on, you kind of zone out a bit, go into a bit of a flow state, and relax, and and it is much easier. And being, going solo is no respite from being up front. It's 10, 11 hours of breaking trail, and then it's just mentally exhausting, the navigating. And I just learned a lot about myself, about how to kind of really zone out, and just kind of almost go into these, a lot of endurance athletes talk about it. I certainly haven't mastered it, yet, but this kind of flow states where you can almost, be thinking about something else, but still, functioning, navigating, and, and making good progress. So yeah, I think it's the psychological aspects between team and solo is probably the biggest difference.
Yeah, fascinating. Just to manage expectations here, because there's got so many questions. So I think maybe if we just go for another 5 minutes, so people I'm sure are fascinated and we can stay on for hours. But if we go for another 5 minutes, I'm going to ask maybe a couple of questions. Catherine, who are the 2 men photographed on Louis' skis behind you? I presume. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. So so these are Asner's expedition skis. So the red coloured skis, that's Roald Amundsen, so the Norwegian first man to reach the South Pole. They're a Norwegian brand, these skis, so there's going to be Norwegian polar explorers on there. And the lighter coloured skis, that's the Norwegian Borg Usland. Again, hugely accomplished polar explorer, done some incredible journeys in the North and South Pole. So yeah, they're the new set with Borg on. I've yet to use those, so I'm looking forward to, getting out and testing them out.
Very good. Okay, Mike Sharp, which of your expeditions to Antarctica do you cherish the most?
I think the trip with Henry was huge because it was my first expedition, my first foray into polar travel. I made a huge amount of mistakes. I got so many things wrong, and it just made the journey kind of so difficult. But I just learned so much, and it was bizarre in that I suffered. It was a suffer fest. I suffered all the way, and I got to the South Pole, and I turned around to Henry and I said, "I'm never ever coming back here again. This is just like so horrendous." And he kind of looked at me with a knowing smile, as if to say, you'll change your mind. And it's surprising, you get back, and after a few weeks, you've gorged yourself and put a bit of weight back on, and you kind of have this selective memory, where you start to forget all the bad bits. And and then you kind of think, it's not long before you get an itchy feet and thinking, yeah, actually it wasn't so bad. Maybe I could go back and kind of do this, but I think it has to be that sort of first trip. It was the history behind it, starting from Amundsen's start point,
yeah, of course.
crossing the whole of the Ross Ice Shelf, that Steve mentioned. That was like the size of Spain before we even got to Antarctica. And then the climb up the Axel Heiberg, that was stunning as well. So, but they've all been, incredible journeys. And then coming down the Shackleton Glacier, I'm really fortunate that I've done 3 different glaciers, on my journeys through the Transantarctic Mountains. And again, the Shackleton Glacier was stunning, very different type of glacier. The wind had ripped off all the snow, so there was this diamond hard blue ice, underneath. So we'd skied 1,000 miles, so we'd been doing a sliding skiing motion, got to the top of the Shackleton Glacier, then we had to switch to putting on crampons and walking, then for 100 miles, and we all started getting blisters again and like aching joints because you just weren't used to walking, and the scenery in there was absolutely incredible. So they've all got incredible moments in there. But I think, just doing that trip and sharing a tent with Henry, because he was so passionate, about Antarctica and polar history, and that really rubbed off on me. That passion. It was inspiring to spend that time with him. So
brilliant. Yeah, that's great, Luke. Thank you. So I think what we'll do, thanks so much for all the questions, everybody. We've got sort of 30 plus to get through. I think if we try and, we will screen grab these questions, and maybe we'll get back to these people over the course of the next couple of weeks.
I'm happy to do an email.
There's some really good questions in here. I'm sure people will be fascinated.
I can stay on for a few more minutes if you want to do a couple more. I'm okay for time. So
yeah, well, I don't know. I think actually interesting. I think we've covered an awful lot this evening. 100 years worth of Antarctic expeditions, and obviously we talked about, I guess, the 3 main pioneers of the heroic age.
Scott, the SAS, as I call them.
The SAS, yeah, there you go. And I just thought actually maybe it'd be appropriate just if people aren't familiar with this quote, which I absolutely love. So fellow explorer Sir Raymond Priestley said, for speed and efficiency of travel, give me Amundsen. For scientific discovery, give me Scott. But when all hope has gone and you're in a hopeless situation, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton. And I think what's quite intriguing about that quote is it pays great respect to all 3, but for 3 very, very different skill sets. Okay, so here's a closing question then, Lou. If you were to go on an expedition to cross Antarctica, which one would you choose? Clearly, you've got to say Shackleton, but
I would. I'd go with Shackleton, and the reasons why. I mean, Steve touched on Scott, and his sort of, I guess, failures is the wrong word, but sort of poor planning and stuff. Amundsen, obviously absolutely incredible. He was, meticulous and highly skilled polar travel, but there's definitely some concerns around Amundsen's leadership, when he set out early for the poles, slightly too early in the winter season, and pretty much abandoned his men. It was on the return journey. I thought that was pretty shocking sort of leadership. But yeah, Shackleton, just, that. And that transition of, deciding, realizing, okay, the expedition is lost, but that change in purpose, his purpose then, right, I'm going to bring back all these men,
yes,
alive, and that drive and motivation he had to, against all the odds, to do that, and I say me as a young lad, reading that book Endurance, about that, depicting that story was a huge turning point and massively inspiring. to read about that. So yeah, for me, sounds the obvious answer, but it's for me, it's the only answer. It would have to be Shackleton.
Well, amazing, and I guess to this very day, Shackleton's management and leadership in crisis is still studied widely, including Harvard Business School, and some just amazing quotes that you see quite often, especially at the moment, with the global pandemic. Things like difficulties are just things to overcome after all. And so I guess he was, as you say, is a kind of, will go down in history as one of the greatest leaders, especially when faced with extreme adversity. Well, that was amazing, Lou. Thank you so much for your presentation. Absolutely brilliant. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable evening. All great things come to an end. And so we bring our inaugural online festival to a close. A special thank you to our guest speakers and content contributors. A special thank you to the entire Shackleton team, and especially Patrick Tillard, Shackleton's content manager, for working incredibly hard over the past few weeks to bring our first online festival alive across media channels. Rachel Halliburton for curating the week and bringing together world-leading experts to provide incredible insights into the many facets of life at the bottom of our planet. But most of all, thank you to everybody that's tuned in over the last 7 days. It's been an absolute brilliant week, and it's been hugely inspiring to know there are so many people out there that are deeply interested in the continent of Antarctica and all the elements. So please stay in touch with us, and we hope to see you all again very, very soon.